Welcome back to the channel, everyone. In this video, I'm going to be going over my latest creation, which is centered around the Lone Wolf Distributors TWF full-size frame and GGP, or Gray Ghost Precision, slide and barrel. So in my last video, I went over the first initial impressions of the Lone Wolf Distributors TWF frame. It's before I had any of the lower parts kits. I did have the slide in there, but I did not have the parts all together to put together a complete gun. As you guys can see, it is now a complete gun, and before I go any further in the video, I want to show that the gun is safe. You see, I am going to have a magazine in this video, but as you can tell, it is empty. I do also have my Gen 5 G19 and my previous build, which is a Gen 3 G19-ish build, and I only have these videos in here for some comparisons to show some of the things that differ and some of the things that are same between the Lone Wolf frame along with the slide. So to go over again, the Lone Wolf TWF frame, I picked this up solely because I had picked up the Gray Ghost Precision upper and barrel while GGP was having their 60% off sale. I just couldn't resist. I was using it. I figured that I would use it for my Gen 4 G34 that I have, being that I don't have any other Gen 4 guns. And I don't have a threaded barrel for the G34. As I wait on my suppressor, I did want to have a suppressor host for the G17, as my other G17, which is the Gen 5, has the Parker Mountain Machine barrel and comp on it, and the comp is not something that you want to keep taking on and off and on and off. Maybe some people do, but it's not something that I was really interested in. And G17 really is my favorite Glock of them all. So originally just picked up the slide. Again, super cheap, threaded barrel, and then again, my hopes were, or my intent were, to just put it on, swap the slide and barrel combination back and forth between the OEM Gen 4 large frame and, or I should say full-size frame. And then after I got it, I decided that, you know what, I would just want to go ahead and get a dedicated frame for it. So I mentioned in the last video that Gen 4 support overall is really very slim in comparison to the Gen 3 and you know, the latest generation, which is the Gen 5. I don't know 100% why that is. Gen 4 seems to be the redheaded stepchild of the generations of all the Glocks. I guess people tend to think that it doesn't really offer much benefit over the Gen 3. I personally, you know, the Gen 4 was one step towards ambidextrous controls. They did also go to a different trigger housing. There's probably some other changes that I'm not 100% certain about. But for me, as a left-handed shooter, having an ambidextrous magazine release, that is a huge plus for me. And that was something that only came exclusively to the Gen 4s. Of course, when you go to the Gen 5s, you do also get a left side slide release. So Gen 5s is really where it's at for me. But back to the focus of this video, trying to find a Generation 4 OEM frame was pretty much next to impossible. Everywhere that I looked, I could not find any of them in stock. Looking for aftermarket options, you know, they're in today's day and age with the ATF doing what they're doing when it comes to quote ghost guns. It is harder to do P80 frames, or the unserialized frames. The Lone Wolf Distributors TWF frame is a serialized frame. The serial number is underneath the rail here, which I will go ahead and remove the light so that you can see. Serial number is underneath there. So if you buy one of these frames, it is something that you are going to have transferred to an FFL and then fill out one of the 4473s to be registered to you. So TWF frame, some of the things that I really like about it and some of the things that I really don't, or maybe even pros and cons. Anybody who's familiar with Glocks can probably see right off the bat that the grip angle is not as steep as it is on an OEM Glock. And you see this gun is unloaded also. In comparison there, I know one of the things that people complain about the Glocks is its pointability, or its natural pointability is not quite as good as it is on something like a 1911, where it doesn't have such a steep angle. And I would have to say that I agree with that. This gun, as you bring it up and you press out, it does come to the eye a lot more naturally feeling than an OEM Glock. You know, if you're shooting OEM Glocks on a regular basis, you've trained around that and you've built up your muscle memory to where you can defeat that. But I will give it a huge pro where this thing is a lot more shootable, or at least pointable, naturally pointable than an OEM Glock. Back straps I went over in the last video. This one is the full-size back strap. The other option that comes with it is pretty much a straight option. The Magwell is a polymer Magwell. It is one of the features that are built in. It is something that is removable. It is pretty readily removable. Does have a rail on it. Unlike a OEM Glock rail, where you only have one slot to position it, you do have 3 slots on the Lone Wolf. Now, one thing that you will notice is that the 2, or the forward and the aft slot, are wider than the slot that are in the middle. Now, Glock has a slightly wider slot than the standard Picatinny attachment. And I mentioned in another video of mine, and I think I glossed over it in the previous TWF frame video, was that when it came to fitting a light on here, in this case a Surefire X300 Turbo, or even the X300U, it would not fit. In order to get the light in the correct position, it needed to pick up the center slot. And when using the Picatinny guide, which like I have on here, it will not, it wants to pick up either the very forward one or the aft one, which it cannot because it hits the trigger guards. So you have to end up using the universal guide, but once you put that on there, it does not want to fit on there very snugly. And you have to end up using the rail lock feature, because if you put it on the gun, or if you put the universal fast switch, I don't remember the exact term for it. I made a video for it, so I should know about it. But it rattles around a lot on the gun. So to me, that was one of the downsides if you're using one of these X300s. But it can be overcome by using the rail lock feature, or the rail lock mounting pattern on the Surefire lights. One of the other things about the Grey Ghost precision frame that is a plus that I didn't mention in the last video is that you'll notice here, you know, a lot of people, when they get an OEM Glock, they will do a double undercut, or at least a single undercut. Right here you see there's a lot of material there that as you grip the gun, it feels like it digs into the knuckle of your finger. Again, when I first got into Glocks, it was something that bothered me, but I don't really notice it so much now. And then they'll also do another cut here. So for your gripping hand, your index finger of your supporting hand gives you a little bit more purchase on the gun. While the Lone Wolf Distributors frame does not have a double undercut, it does have a single undercut that's built in. Now, one of the other perks about this is you'll notice that the trigger guard is rounded. And one thing when it comes to other frames, such as the Polymer 80, definitely like this Grey Ghost precision frame, you'll notice that the trigger guard is much wider than it is on, especially an OEM Glock, and even, you know, this Grey Ghost, Lone Wolf Distributors frame. And what that does is eliminates a lot of holster options for you out there. I do not have any other holsters for G17 outside of a holster Filster floodlight, which, if anybody's familiar with Filster floodlights, they center more so around gripping the light and not so much the gun. But typically, for the most part, standard holsters will grip around the trigger guard. And when you deviate so much from the OEM trigger guard and make it much wider, it will not fit any of your standard holsters out there. It may fit something like your Safariland, which I do not know for 100% because I have not tried putting this gun in my Safariland holster. But I do know that when I ordered a holster for this gun, I had to get one specifically for a P80 because it would not fit inside of it. So, advantage of the Lone Wolf Distributors frame, it is rounded, it is a slimmer profile, so it should share, at least they advertise, that it should share holster compatibility with any other OEM Glock holster available on the market currently. Moving on to the slide assembly. So like I mentioned, this is a Grey Ghost Precision Gen 4 frame. They do make slides for Gen 1 through 3, a slide for Gen 4, and then one through for Gen 5. So this model here, I believe, is their option number 3. I may be incorrect about that. It does have a very nice grouping texture on it. It is shallow, but not too over grippy. It does have the cutout on the top of it for the clearance window. And on top of that, it has the GGP logo on the one side of the frame, and of course on the other side of the frame. To me, this was their most attractive option that they have. One of the other things about it is cut from RMR, but it also utilizes a GGP specific plate, which you can see right there. So if you have an RMR, it will not bolt directly onto the frame or onto the slide. You put this slide plate attachment on here, and I believe the other one is for a loophole DPP. One thing, as I say, I'm not super crazy about this mounting system. Well, let me go into the pros first. So as a pro, as you can see, this has a very, very deep cut, especially in comparison to something like this, which has the industry standard 125 depth cut to it. And as what you can see is a reference point would be how close it is to the ejector cutout here, or extractor cutout. When you look at it here on the GGP, you can see it is dang near inside of it. So it comes with the plates that you need either for RMR or for DDP. Some of the pros of that is having a deeper cut, is it sits lower to the bore axis. It allows you to use lower iron sights if you want to co-witness with it. Some things that I don't like about it. So can definitely appreciate that most people who mill guns today, you know, I had this gun milled by Hex Precision, and I also had this slide here built, or that I purchased from Hex Precision, is that there are recoil lugs that are machined into the slide. And recoil slugs, what they do is they fit into holes in the bottom of the RMR, and they take the stresses of the back and forth motion of the slide moving. So it takes it off of the screws, which, you know, there has been reports of screws shearing off that don't have recoil lugs or have weak recoil lugs. When you put the stresses on that screw and the slide action reciprocating back and forth, they tend to shear off the screws. With the GGP slide, they do not have recoil lugs machined into them. Not super keen about that, but one thing I can say about it is that with the plate that they include for the RMR, it does fit exactly to the front and the back of the RMR. So I am assuming that they are using the fitment from the RMR into the plate to take up the loads that may be incurred from recoiling, the slide recoiling and reciprocating back and forth. Time will tell. You know, Grey Ghost Precision, they're not exactly new to the game. So I am going to assume that that is a solid option, and there is some type of science and testing that they have put behind it. Moving on to discuss the barrel. This is a Grey Ghost Precision barrel, as you can see from the GGP there. It has this nice brownish bronzes color to it. It's got the logo and stamped on top of it, a little bit of machining here done to make it a little bit more custom. It is threaded 1/2 by 28. Did include the thread cap and the O-ring to keep the thread cap securely attached to it. I did go to my local FFL earlier today, where I am waiting on my rugged Obsidian 9. And kind of coincidentally, the piston that is attached to the can perfectly matched up to the color of the barrel. It almost looks like they were made by the same shop. The shoulder here, or the extension, left plenty of room for the suppressor to reciprocate back and forth. So that was something that I was very pleased to see. As far as the Eternals go, at the same time while GGP was running a slide under sale and their barrels, they were also running a sale on their slide, or upper slide completion kit, is I believe what they call it. Or you can refer to it as an upper parts kit. So the upper parts kit consists of the back plate here, along with the striker, and all the Eternals that go inside, including the extractor. I have used it with success in this build here, which was the Gen 3. So I had no hesitation to go ahead and pick up another one. When it comes to the lower frame, I did have a lot of issues with this gun. I'll probably end up doing a separate video on this one. Started off using Lone Wolf Distributors lower parts kit. Could not get the thing to cycle reliably. Changed over to an OEM parts kits with the exception of being the pins, obviously, and the trigger shoe. So it has an OEM trigger bar. I changed it out to an Overwatch Precision trigger shoe, but basically this thing would jam pretty regularly. And once I switched things out to OEM parts kits, including trigger housing, trigger bar, connector, slide release, it ended up running more reliably. So when I came to this build here, I ordered all the OEM parts as well. The locking bar or locking block, everything to it. With the exception here is I am using the Invoke slide lock or slide release, I guess, depending on who you ask, because my friend David Salo over at Invoke, great company that builds custom Glock parts, he had sent me a couple of these over for free. I had them, so I went ahead and used it, but used an OEM spring. And then, of course, you can see here, this is not an OEM magazine release. This is the Vickers Tactical extended release. And you can see in comparison to an OEM slide release, which is a lot more blocky and square, the Vickers Tactical one is a little bit more rounded. Did use an OEM spring. And with magazines going into it, it does absolutely no problem with inserting or injecting magazines freely. And I will say, furthermore, on the mag funnel that comes with it, you know, with my G17 mag here that I have the Vickers Tactical mag extension on it, there is no issue getting the mag release in there. And, you know, with this design here, where it uses a retaining pin, there is no problem pushing it into the magazine and fitting. You can see here there is a slight bit of interference, which has weared a small mark in there, but is nothing that I can physically see, which is something that I can't say to something like this Rival Arms. And you can see the Rival Arms, which I did have a previous review on. I did have to do some trimming in order to clear the pin, which this is a G17 mag, so it's not going to show it. But on my G19 magazines that have the same mag extension on it, it would not insert into the magazine with that pin if I did not perform that bit of clearance cut that was on there. So another pro for the TWF frame here. So issues that I've had with this frame, and I will say that I have not gone and shot this gun yet, so there may be issues that pop up that I am not even aware about. But some of the things that caught my attention right off the bat is when I went to install the frame pins. So the trigger housing pin slid in nice and freely like it should, but the pin here, you cannot insert it into the gun without tapping it in with a little bit of hammer pressure. That is not something that is typically seen with OEM Glocks, which, you know, I know this one here is a Gen 5, so it does not have that third pin. But I can say here on this frame here, it does not have that issue. And really, when it comes to Glock frames, you should not have any problems. You should not really have to tap frame pins in. You should be able to use the Glock Armorer's tool and be able to push them in with hand pressure. And this is one that you absolutely cannot do. The trigger pin was super tight at first also. Taking the gun apart several times, that ended up freeing itself up. And one thing, and I will say one other aftermarket part that I have outside of OEM is the Vickers Tactical slide release here. For me, you know, with a Gen 4 not having ambidextrous controls, I love these Vickers Tacticals slide releases. They are not super ridiculous looking, and they have just a bit of added material to give you a little bit of grip. So me, as a right or left-handed shooter living in a right-handed gun world, I have become accustomed to when you lock a slide back. Sorry, let me lock this back. So when a slide locks open on the last round, that I am using my index finger to reach up and release the slide. Having that little bit of extra material makes it a lot easier for me as a left-handed shooter. So back to some of the issues that I found. So got this gun together, fitment to the frame and the slide felt very well. You know, when you cycle the action, it feels good. It doesn't feel abnormal. It doesn't feel like there's any abnormal pressure. You go to squeeze the trigger, it doesn't feel any different than what you would feel from an OEM trigger. But one thing that I discovered was, sometimes when you slingshot the slide and hold the trigger down, and of course now that I'm on video, it doesn't seem to want to do it, but sometimes what I found is that when I slingshot the slide like that versus just letting it go somewhat gently, the trigger would lock to the back, and you could not get it to come forward short of recycling the action. I do not know what was causing that. I will say that originally I had a Overwatch Precision trigger, which was the full trigger. The Overwatch Precision does use OEM trigger bars. It seemed to be the cutout for the trigger here in the Lone Wolf Distributors frame seems to be a little bit more narrow than what you have in OEM, and I would have it seemed like there may be some issues dragging here. Did some troubleshooting. I went ahead and took since this is the full-size frame, I took the OEM G34 upper, put it on the frame, cycled the action, and I had the same problem. The trigger would sometimes hang up when I really forcefully slingshotted the action, and I would be more than happy. Oh, there you go. See? Stuck back. Can't get it to come forward. You hear it click. But the trigger bar is not engaging the connector correctly. I don't know what's causing that. I'm sure somebody out there could try to figure it out. I did go on the forums and try to ask about it a little bit. I do have one of the Armor's back plates that is halfway cut out so you can see the striker engagement to the sear on the cruciform. I do have at least 90% engagement. The striker doesn't seem to be jumping over it. It's mind-boggling to me. We'll see what happens as the gun wears in, as I put some rounds through it, if it is even an issue. Because as you saw, as I cycled this several times, I cannot get it to replicate. Oh, there it goes. Trigger stuck back, won't reset. But when I kind of gently release it, pull it back, no problem. But it's when I can really slingshot it, there you go, it sticks. And, you know, maybe that will mimic more closely to what it would be like when it's actually under live fire. Time will tell. Where you run into problems when you do Glock builds is that you do have tolerance stacking. So you have different manufacturers. They will take what Glock has listed for tolerances on a gun and say, okay, we're going to make the parts here and they should be within this tolerance. But when you have aftermarket everything, so lower, upper, barrel, it's hard to tell where your problem is coming from. Definitely had that problem when it came to doing this build because it was the same thing. You had a GGP lower. This was a hex precision slide, as you see an agency barrel. Using the GGP upper parts kit or slide completion kit, and then starting with the Lone Wolf Distributors. You know, if you take an OEM gun and you start replacing things one by one, little by little, and you notice problems, well, it's a little easier to pinpoint what the problem may be. So if you go change out let's say a slide release here, and when you put an aftermarket one in there, all of a sudden the gun won't cycle correctly or won't lock back or whatever it may be, it's pretty easy to say, okay, well, it worked fine as OEM, so that last part I changed out, that's what the problem is. When you come to complete builds like this, it is hard to tell because you can't really pinpoint because almost everything is non-OEM. So time will tell when it comes to this frame. You know, going back to a little bit more of the troubleshooting, I did try the OEM G34 frame or slide and barrel on top of here. I did also try the GGP slide and barrel on an OEM G34 or full-size frame. And when I put the OEM lower paired up with the upper, no problems with the trigger whatsoever. So I say all that to say is that I can pretty much narrow it down to something in the lower, and I don't know what that may be. I did, even though everything else is OEM in this, besides the trigger guard, or I'm sorry, the mag release, I did put in an OEM slide lock here and still have the same problem with the trigger. You know, one of the lessons that I learned from doing this build here is you would not think that having any of these lower parts kits would have any issue with cycling of the gun. But hey, you know, going from lone wolf distributors to OEM solved the problem. And again, there's a lot more people, there's people out there who have a lot more knowledge than me into Glocks. And I'm sure, you know, some of you may watch this video, and as I work the action here and run into the issue with the trigger when we're set, automatically know what the issue is. I am not one of those. So where I bring all those points up to basically say, if you are not super knowledgeable into all the ins and outs of how a Glock works and how things engage each other, and you're going to put a build together, you may want to double think that, because if you run into problems, if you don't have the knowledge or the ability to really troubleshoot through them, you know, you're not going to feel fully confident in a gun. Even though I put some money into this gun, I can't say that this is one of the guns that I would go to if something happened in an emergency. These two guns here, even though this one here has become dependable, it has a hiccup every now and then when it comes to shooting weaker commercial ammo such as Tula 115 grain. I can tell you that every single OEM Glock that I have, so whether it be this G19, you know, my G17, even though it has a PMM barrel and component, my G48, my G43, I have never had a malfunctioning issue when it came to shooting crap ammo such as Tula 115 grain. It is just, they've always gobbled everything up. The only time that I've ever had any issues with any Glocks was when it came to doing these builds. So pros and cons of both of them, and in summary, you know, when you are doing custom Glock builds, it is something to take into consideration. I know there are some people, you go on the forums that you know, scream, why do you mess with Glock perfection? You just leave it the way that it is. And you know, that is one point. And other ones will say, hey, listen, I want to customize it to make it better. It's not perfect. Everything can be made a little bit better. And whether it be a trigger, whether it be a mag release, whether it be a whole frame because you want a different grip angle on it, whatever, how you want it to be, just know that as you change parts out, tolerance stacking can kick in and you may possibly run into issues. So because of those things that I mentioned, some of the issues that I have with some of these guns, I will never depend on these guns to be my go-to gun. I have other guns that are closer to OEM that I will rely on for that. You know, maybe as time goes on and I get hundreds or thousands of rounds for these and I no longer have any issues, and whatever things that are keeping these things from cycling as reliably as I have seen with my OEM Glocks, well, you know, maybe those parts will wear in, and it'll be something that I'll change my mind on. I'll be a little bit more comfortable carrying or using as a regular basis. I don't carry any of my G17s or G19s just because they print too much on me. That's another reason why I don't have any of the holsters. Lastly, I do want to go back to the optics on this. While, you know, one of the benefits of having a lower cut here for something like an RMR, or if you want to do a Trijicon 508T or any of the options that are out there, it does sit at lower, since it's lower access to the bore. But I did have to kind of do some math when it came to figuring out the sight. So Dawson Precision has typically been my go-to when it came to buying iron sights. And, you know, like I mentioned before, 125 deep is the go-to, or I should say the industry standard when it comes to optic cuts. And, you know, they had, in the past, they had told me basically, you know, when you have a 125 cut, if you have a Gen 5 gun, I want to say it's 300 for the front and 305 for the rear. So I did try to do a gross measurement and measure from the top of the slide down to the top of the mounting plate, which obviously was deeper. I did the math. I picked the sights that were available from Dawson Precision to match that. Unfortunately for me, it is a little bit higher than what I typically like to see. And if you can see the sight picture here, nothing that is horrible. It's just a little bit more than what I typically like to see. And for more of an apples to apples comparison, here is my 125 deep cut, optic cut with the 300 and 305 sights. Pretty low in the viewing glass of the RMR. Definitely more so than the G17 here, the GGP G17 frame. So obviously I didn't do my math calculations right. And again, it's not a huge difference, and it's not like it takes up half the window. But for me personally, I like my iron sights to sit as low as possible in the viewing window, almost to the point where they're unusable because they're just backups. And in comparison here, I'll show you the G19 though. The 508T definitely has a larger viewing window than the RMR does, but you can see pretty low in the viewing glass of the optic. So I think that wraps up everything with this build. Again, Grey Ghost Precision Gen 4 slide barrel and upper parts kit, paired up with the Lone Wolf Distributors TWF full-size frame with mostly OEM lower parts kits. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. As I mentioned in several videos before, I'm very humbled by the amount of subscribers that I've been getting lately, even though it's a very low amount in comparison to some of the big YouTubers out there. You know, I just do this on the side for fun, do it to help people out. So if you got something out of it, please hit the like button, and look forward to any of the future videos I have. Tell your friends about it, share it on social media, and give me feedback. I love to hear the feedback that I get on a pretty regular basis. So again, hope that guy helped you. Anybody out there with any kind of decision that we be making in the slide or barrel combination or the frame. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.